Yo, well, hello again, everyone. I'm glad to be here and sharing my knowledge with you again. I was here before teaching a color theory class. My name is Leerdemoder, which is a fancy schmancy Norse way of saying mistress, Sigridr, galdrakona, Gala, Eiriksdottir. Everyone just calls me Gala. I am a pelican and a laurel from Ontir. And contrary to popular belief, I was not a scribal laurel. I'm actually a bardic laurel. But I also do scribal, and I've been doing calligraphy, etc., for as long as I can remember. Um, Sorry, all of my things are binging all at once. Um, and I got into scribal and illumination actually kind of late, but I've been a painter for a very long time. I was actually a fine arts major in university, and I kind of concentrated in painting um, and various like fundamental stuff. But painting has sort of always been my love as far as art goes. So I got into doing Scribble, and I found when I was doing Scribble, a lot of people would come to me and ask me. There was two questions they always asked me. One was, why are the colors I'm using not working? Hence the color theory class. And the other one was, I've made this mistake and I don't know how to fix it. What do I do? Um, and so I created this class as a very humorous, sort of tongue-in-cheek way of looking at how medieval scribes handled their mistakes, their oopses, or how they didn't, because oftentimes they didn't actually do anything about it. They just left it. Just so that we can take a look at our own mistakes that we make and maybe not freak out quite so much. And so that we can maybe think of some creative ways to fix or disguise some of the mistakes and oopses that we make along the way. So bear that in mind as we're going through this. This is very tongue in cheek. I know there's a couple of slides in there that I'm making fun of in this presentation on purpose, just because it's sometimes a little ridiculous. Feel free to ask questions at any time if you have any questions. This isn't a terribly long class. It's only about an hour, roughly, maybe not even that much. So this is the Oops, What Do I Do Now class, fixing scribal errors, a whimsical look at period scribal, something that I can't see to make us something about our imperfections. I'm sorry, I have the big window, the window that shows everybody in here that's covering part of my screen, so I can't move it. First off, everybody makes mistakes. No, really. Everyone makes mistakes. None of us are perfect. We all end up with something sometime. If you are one of those magical people that never makes errors, I bow down to you. I make errors in just about everything that I have ever painted. But I've gotten really good at disguising things too, or making them look like that's exactly how I meant it to be. And so, yeah, we're going to look at some of those things. So, medieval scribes made many errors all the time. If you look at manuscripts, there are errors everywhere, either things that you will see that they've uh, made a spelling error so that they have then had to scrape it off or paint over it and rewrite it, or they write it above or they write it below. But they made errors all the time. This particular one is one of my favorites because this one, they fixed it by scraping the paper or scraping the parchment or vellum, whatever it is they're working with, to the point where it's got holes in it. Oh, that one's been scraped with an inch of its life. You'll also see there's an error further down where they have painted over with a different color to fix the spelling error. So many different errors in here. Some of them are not necessarily errors, but something that somebody else has come back and corrected. So, but they're everywhere. They're everywhere when you look at the manuscripts. So, how did medieval scribes fix their errors? Well, sometimes they just didn't. This is literally from a manuscript that says, I stupidly made this blot on the first day of December, 1482. There was nothing you could do about it, so you just leave it. This is a time when, like for now, again, I should have said from the beginning, in Ontario, we're a little bit different than some of the other kingdoms in that most of our awards are photocopies. So we do multiples of them. We don't necessarily always do originals. But in period, they would have been using parchment or vellum, which was really expensive. So you didn't just ball it up and throw it in the circular bin. You had to keep using that piece of vellum or parchment. And sometimes they came with errors in them, so you had to work around those. So you couldn't just chuck it like we could if we wanted to. But I'm the kind of person who said, I've put hours of work into this thing. I'm not chucking it. I'm going to find a way to fix this if I can. If it's something really catastrophic, like I've dumped my paint water across the entire thing, well, maybe that might not be salvageable. But if I can salvage it, I will. Sometimes you just own it and move on. Fix it how you can. I like this one on the right-hand side where they've literally just scratched out the mistake and redone it. Sometimes whole pages get scratched out and redone. This particular one, they've done spelling errors a number of times of the same word, which is interesting. Sometimes you will correct it by using what's called a superscript, and that is just to write over the top of the line that you've made an error. Sometimes you'll see these in here, and it is actually just somebody making a correction or notes and whatnot. Or you can use a superscript, or I mean subscript, which is to write under the line as well. So I see a lot of that. Or you can add notes in the margins. You'll also see lots of notes in the margins. And this particular one on the left-hand side, I like that they've actually done it like it's a footnote, which is great, or a citation, which is fun. Yeah, same thing on the other side there. They're pointing, I believe, because I can't see underneath this thingy on my screen, pointing to where this mistake was made and making that correction off to the side. Or here we go. Here's an actual footnote. This is the error. Here's how it should have been, what should have been. This is the one slide that I had somebody get a little upset about because I made this joke and it was just, hey, Homer, nice work on that Iliad. So I went ahead and made a few tiny little notes and corrections for you. Don't worry, I don't think anyone will even notice. I understand that this is probably not what's going on here. It's probably more the case of a lot of different people have made different notes on this particular page. And it's not necessarily errors, etc. It's commentary. But it just cracked me up how there's much more commentary than the actual manuscript itself, which I thought was hilarious. And then there's this one wherein somebody made a complete and colossal error. And so the only thing they could do is just cross it out and do it again on the next page. Again, you can't throw the page out. There's stuff on the other side of it. So they just crossed it out, went on to the next page. I can't remember whether these were facing pages or if they were back and front, but either way, they just crossed it out and did it again. Same with this one, made an error, so they crossed it out, redid it on the next page, and then they added in this little bitty little piece in there with the corrections, etc. Sometimes you have to get your knife out and scrape out the error and just redo the text. If you are able to do that, that's great. Here in Ontario, we oftentimes use what we call parch tone. I don't know if they have other names elsewhere for it, which is a paper that kind of resembles parchment, but it's very thin and it does not scrape worth a crap. It also doesn't burnish back down again worth a crap either. I hate that paper so much, I can't even tell you, but we use it a lot. So scraping sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. Depends. It also depends on what color you're having to scrape off. If you're using red, sometimes it doesn't scrape so well. Blue sometimes also doesn't scrape so well. They're very concentrated colors and they tend to just stick and you cannot get them off. So depends on what you're using. Again, having to scrape out the one on the left there, they scraped it all out. They'd missed a line entirely, so they scraped out the line through the middle and then wrote in the two lines next to it. The one on the right, same thing. They had scraped out something that you can see underneath and rewrote what it needed to be fixed to. And it looks to me like it was a completely different scribe that did that too, because it's not the same hand. Same here. Somebody had to come along and scrape it out and make the corrections. We just saw this one earlier where they have scraped it to death. Sometimes you might even get your paints out and paint over it, kind of like medieval whiteout. This is not actually my favorite way of fixing things, particularly on white papers like we use here in Ontario, for the simple fact that white it's sometimes really hard to match that white. It might look in your living room under your lighting like they match completely. The paint and the paper are great, so you can't tell. But as soon as you go to somebody else's lighting or you're outside, sometimes that white will suddenly look like it's more blue or more yellow and it stands out like a spotlight. So it's not my favorite way of fixing things. Sometimes it might be the only way, but it's not my favorite for that simple fact that it's in different lighting, it's going to look different. I find if you're doing it on a paper that has a different color, like a parchment or a vellum that has a slightly yellowish tone to it, it's sometimes a little bit easier. But white is such a hard thing to match completely. And sometimes the scribes were a little witty and creative. They came up with different ways. So the one on the left you're looking at was a splotch of black ink, presumably. So they turned it into a happy little spider. On the right, this isn't necessarily an error that was made, but there was some space left. And so they covered it in with pictures, which is great. I think the actually under the fish, there was actually something there. It looks to me like there's writing underneath. And so they just covered it. This is one of my favorite slots of all time because someone missed out a verse in whatever this is. So they were like, oh crap, I gotta get this in here. Well, I don't have enough space on the bottom of the page, so I'll just put it off to the side. And then I have this happy little man who's just dragging it in with a lasso underneath where it's supposed to go. And I think that's adorable. What's more adorable is that at later time, another scribe came along and was redoing this manuscript, transcribing this manuscript, whatever, and copied that exactly, did exactly the same thing. And I thought that was hysterical. So rather than actually fixing the error and putting it where it's supposed to, they just completely copied it. But I think it's adorable. And it's actually something we have used in our modern stuff too, which you'll see in a little bit. And I'm not sure which one of these came first and which was second, but yeah, I just thought it was funny that the scribe decided to just copy it exactly. Sometimes they were, like I said, a little more witty. Over here, we have a water spot in the middle that somebody decided that, oh crap, my boss is going to kill me. I got water on here. I am dead. So here we have a little skeleton. On the left, there is a five-legged octopus that has anchored himself to the bottom and he's pointing out some stuff. And then you'll find a lot of peni I mean, pointing at things throughout manuscripts. I think it's hysterical, but I'm like, all right, okay, whatever. Here we have was actually a defect in the vellum. It had a mole, I'm presuming, which this scribe, rather than just leaving it alone, turned it into a 10-legged crab, I think, because it looks like pincers in the front, and then actually wrote defect next to it instead of just leaving it and ignoring it. But okay. And then again, on the right-hand side, we have this funny little guy here who's going, oh, oops, I missed a line. It was supposed to go here, and pointing to where that line was supposed to go. You'll see this kind of thing sometimes too, is that off to the side where we've added a little bit on a scroll to the side. I've seen a lot of those, and I think it's really cute. I haven't had the opportunity to use that, but I think it's cute. And here again, we have somebody who's gone, oh crap, we missed some stuff. So they wrote it up across the top of the page there, and now they're dragging, these two men on the left are dragging it into where it was supposed to be in there. And then we have these things called manicules, at least I think that's how it's pronounced, uh, which just simply means hand. And things where they use this to point to stuff all the time, everywhere. Although the one on the left is a bunch of little men's faces with really, really pointy noses that are pointing to things, which is very cute. But manicules you'll see everywhere, a lot, a lot of them, and some of them are very strange. But sometimes it's literally pointing to, here's an error I made. One of the things that cracks me up the most, I think, with a lot of the medieval scribes is that rather than just leaving the error as it is and like so nobody will notice, they literally point to it and go, hey, look at this stupid thing I did. It cracks me up. It's so contrary to how we would do it, that it really makes me laugh when I look at these things. Here's a bunch of different ones, more manticules pointing it all over stuff. I love the one on the bottom right there with somebody who has very long fingers. Here we go again. There's top left, there was a hole in the paper, so they pointed it out rather than just leaving it alone. Again, on the top right, there's another hole, so they put a happy little, I'm assuming that's supposed to be a sheep, could be a pig, I don't know. Um, Bottom left there, there's Cyclops. Okay. And then the one on the bottom there again, bottom right, just a hole. We couldn't just leave it as a hole, so they decorated the hole. And then we get some of these ones. And I think the one on the top right is my favorite. Here is a whole pile of corrections and notes that somebody has made. Why it's a skeleton in a top hat is pointing it out. I don't know, but I think it's hilarious. And I just like the little monk on the right. And I think it says be merry or you marry, something like that, which I have no idea what the context of that is, but I thought it was cute. And then about down on the bottom there, we have some corrections made in bright red. Again, they could have just left it with the dark ink and probably nobody would know the difference, but bright red instead. Okay. Um, these are some that I would maybe not consider good ways to point things out. If you're having a really bad day at work, it's probably a really bad idea to do a hangman's noose on your manuscript. I think your boss is probably going to get a little upset by that. And maybe don't draw medieval Spider-Man on your script and things. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, but probably not the best solution. And then here's a bunch of things. There's doodles and practice bits all over manuscripts. To me, I would practice my lettering on a different page, but okay, we'll just practice it right here on the same page with the manuscript. I To me that's counterintuitive, but okay. So we have doodles and practice letters all over the place. Here's some more doodles. Somebody also having a bad day. And what looks like a pirate ship, maybe to me. I'm not sure, but that's what it looks like to me. I like the little ants. I'm gonna guess that somebody dropped some ink on there and had to figure out a way to disguise it, so they made some happy little ants. And then we have a smiley face and a whole bunch of other kind of doodles. Dude smoking a pipe, holding a flower. All right. I'm not sure what's going on with the piggy. So they draw the piggy hang in there and left the hole above the piggy. I'm not sure about that. I, however, love the one on the right. There was a hole in this parchment, and rather than just having text showing through, they drew this little doodle underneath, and so you see the little dragon through the window. I think that's adorable. Again, great big hole in the manuscript. All right, well, we're just gonna work around it, I guess. And there's all kinds of other little errors and mistakes that they fixed on there. They have also had a tear in their page, which they sewed shut with thread. And here's a bunch more examples of this. So this was one of the things, like you could not throw out this parchment. It's too precious to do that. So you have to work with what you've got. Sometimes it's holes, sometimes it's tears. So they came up with creative solutions. One was to actually embroider something beautiful over the hole. Sometimes it's just functional, so it's just sewn in. Um, the one on the bottom left, though, I'm not sure if that's commentary that's going on there. It seems to me it's a dude who's got some demons going on. I initially thought that the thread was him pooping, but I'm not sure now. I know there's a tear there, so they've just sewn it shut. But I love this idea. I think it's beautiful. Here's a couple more examples where a whole page was torn and they've just worked around it, sewn it up quite beautifully. Same thing here, another manuscript, lots of tears in it. One on the top left here, it looks to me like a scribe who was trying to impress lines into his parchment vellum, whatever it is, maybe pressed a little too hard and went right through. So it's got a bunch of holes or tears, I guess it would be, that they've sewn shut. Same thing with the one on the right there. We have presumably a monk who has got a nice little spine there. And again, on the bottom one there, where a whole section of the page has torn away, so they've sewn it up. And then I love this one on the right, bottom right, where it looks to me like they more or less blanket stitched it closed, just to make this whole lot more beautiful. And I had an opportunity recently to do this very thing. I had a charter that I was working on, and if you're not familiar with what a charter is what we do here in Ontario, which are just mass-produced photocopies that we then paint. I had was just about finished this charter. I've been working on it for quite a while. I did not, however, notice that when I was doing my white work, I must have dropped a big wet splotch of white paint um, on the text portion of the charter off to the side, but I didn't notice it until I ran my arm through it. And when I did that, being paper, the paint had softened the paper up, and so it just kind of turned to mush. And so when I brushed my arm across it, it actually kind of tore the paper. So it made a hole in the paper, and I was so upset because I was so close to being finished this particular charter, and I quite liked the charter, so I didn't want to get rid of it. So I thought for a second, I was like, well, I wonder if this would work to do that on this paper. So I tried it out, and here we go. I started off with just doing a blanket stitch because that's kind of what it looked like to me. And I embroidered it closed, and it worked great. There's the charter on the right-hand side. And the person who it went to thought it was the greatest thing in the entire universe because nobody's ever, even though it's a mass-produced thing, nobody's ever going to have one like that. So she was thrilled to have it, and I was thrilled that she was thrilled. So it was fun actually. So it was actually quite nice and absolutely 100% period, which is even better. And here we have a bunch more commentary and doodles. I wish I knew what the one on the bottom left actually said. I just thought that the doodles are funny. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but it's really cute. And then, yeah, somebody's got some commentary up there having a bad day. Yeah, these monks that were doing these Scribble stuff had a lot to say. And they were a little crass sometimes, but again, I just thought it was adorable. And if all else fails, blame the cat. So they used to keep cats in their scriptoriums. Cats, as anybody who's a cat owner, I am not, but anybody who's a cat owner knows cats go where they please, and they don't care what it is they're stepping all over. So here we have somebody's kitty has walked through the ink and then right across their manuscript. I'm sure everybody's probably seen that before, but I think it's hysterical. And then there's this one. I'm going to have to ask somebody else to read this because I can't see half of it. This was a manuscript somebody was working on. The cat came in, peed on the manuscript.
Here is nothing missing, but a cat urinated on this during a certain night. Cursed be the pesty cat that urinated over this book during the night in Devonshire, and because of it, many other cats too. And beware, well, not to leave open books at night where cats can come.
All right. Don't leave your manuscripts out where cats can come. So, yeah, can't throw it out. So, what do? There you go. But clearly, this guy was really upset about it. And the reason they kept cats in the scriptorium was because rodents love parchment and vellum, and they would come in and eat the pages out of their books, etc. So they kept cats to keep the rodents away. And again, the one on the left there, you see the scribe who looks as though he's about to throw something at the rodent that's on the table next to him. And it reads, "Most wretched mouse, often you provoke me to anger. May God destroy you." So hence why we have the cats, but then you have the other problems. A lot of what we've been looking at right now has been errors and corrections for text. I was trying to find painting errors, actual illumination errors, which is a lot harder because, I mean, as a painter, you can disguise what you're doing. Um, this one to me looked like somebody had made an error. Somebody else also pointed out that it's not possibly not actually an error in the painting. Yeah, so I don't know if it is or isn't, but it was the only one I could find that sort of kind of looked like it might be an error. But this one is. Um, Presumably, somebody had scraped through their ink that they were using, I'm guessing, and yeah, they just left it. So that so far right now is the only one I have actually been able to find, which is good, because that means that the scribes are good at hiding their stuff. All right, so now I'm going to look at some of the more modern things that I have learned how to do for disguising errors. Um, for instance, you accidentally paint outside the lines where you were not intending. So then I ended up turning it into things like a drop shadow, um, or just a little bit of a highlighting around whatever it is. And then I carried it on through the rest of the design, like the one on the right, thereby disguising the fact that I painted over the lines. Oops. The one on the left here is actually done by one of my apprentices. My apprentice wasn't the one putting the names on this charter, and the person who put the names on the charter actually mixed up and put the name of the award where the person's name was supposed to go, and the person's name where the name of the award was supposed to go. So we decided that we were going to use this push me pull you idea to change that around. So my apprentice Malice used her own or their own device, which is a monkey. And as you'll see, one is pulling the Bardic off the side of the page, and the other one is pushing the name off the other direction. The one on the right is the exact same thing. The line that's on the bottom should have been in between Svetlana and Morrigan on there. So they have used Fluffy, the device of Abacal, to help pull those names up into where they were supposed to be. Here again, we have a little bit of drop shadows happening, but also I had a red paint blorp, as I call them, on the side. So I turned him into a happy little ladybug. Somebody else had the same thing happening on their charter that they were working on. So here we have a little turtle and a thundercloud and some raindrops. Yeah, just find a fun way to disguise or incorporate those little blorps that sometimes happen. Here again, somebody spilled some paint off to the side and decided, since it was a Norse-inspired charter, to just turn it into a kind of a runestone looking thing. I'm not sure. I haven't actually read what the runes say on there, but I'm going to imagine something is like, oops, I made a mistake. And then the one on the bottom right, the actual error was the little ladybug that's hanging out on one of the leaves. They just turned their little red blurb into a ladybug. And then they decided to carry on with that idea throughout the charter that they were doing. So they added other little critters like the little spider that you'll see. But by doing that, it means it's not just a one of, and it's harder to tell that it was actually an error that they had made. And I don't know why there's a little arrow on the bottom left over there. That may have been a caption there or something that I had. Um, this is not the original presentation I had. I had an actual PowerPoint of this presentation before. I somehow deleted that PowerPoint, but I still had the PDF of that. And so then I redid this PowerPoint last night so I could do this, but I don't know what was in that spot. So there you go. This one was actually the illuminator had dropped their pen and made a black mark on the thing. So they turned it into little birdie feet, which was very appropriate because at the time our queen's device, which is in the center there, was chickadees. So they turned it into this little birdie feet and whatnot. And then they carried on the little birdie feet among the design and whatnot. So it kind of sort of looks like it's supposed to be there. And I thought that was pretty inventive. These are two of my own that I disguised. I also made a paintbrush drop. So the one on the left, I just carried on. If you'll see the grass that's kind of growing into this text space, That's where I dropped the paintbrush. So I just carried on, made more grass, and now it looks like it was supposed to be there. And then the same thing on the other side, I accidentally flicked my brush across the page and made all these tiny little paint drops, and I was so mad about it. And then I was like, well, all right, flick, 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 flick. Just carried it on through the whole thing, and suddenly it made it look a lot more interesting and like it was supposed to be there. And now you'd never know that it was not. And I liked it so much, I actually did two more of the same charter and did the same thing because I thought it was fun. Um, this was one of the very, 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 very few originals that I've ever done. And it was very early in my Scribble journey at this point. But this was for a friend of mine who was being laureled, and her persona was Russian. So I wanted to do something for her. So I wrote her a congratulations letter because I couldn't go to her ceremony. She's in Avakal and I live in Ontario. So I wrote her this letter in Russian, in Cyrillic, and I had made an error in there, as you can see in the middle of the page where I'm pointing to. And it looks like I just scratched it out and maybe wrote over the top. I can't quite see that one. And then down below again, I made an error there, at which point I just made it a little more flowery and then wrote the word in next to it. On the right, if you don't know Cyrillic, that N that I'm pointing to is not actually an N. It's an E, and it should have been facing the other direction, like the word above it. But I just at that point was like, leave it. Nobody's going to even notice, I'm sure.
We do have a question.
Sure, yeah.
How do you deal with the paints if they bleed into each other? Hence, changing the color intended for the scroll, charter, or whatever you are painting.
Well, depending on what it is, and where it is in the design, if it was me, I would find a way to repeat that somewhere else in the design, depending again on what it is, because then it looks like you intended to do it. And I think that for me is the idea is that I want to make it look like it was an intentional thing as opposed to an error or a mistake. Um, if nobody else can notice that it was a mistake, then I think I've done my job. So depending on what it is, I would try and find a way of incorporating it into the design or repeating that sort of thing somewhere else intentionally to try and hide that error. That's how I would do it. But I mean, you can come up with all kinds of different ways of disguising it. Um, and here's the other thing, though, too. If it's something that is absolutely catastrophic and you cannot figure out a way to do it, sometimes the correct thing to do is to scrap it and start over. I try and avoid that as much as humanly possible because we all put hours and hours of work into these things that we do, and it's heartbreaking when you have to chuck it, right? So I would try and find a way to incorporate it in any way that you can. Repetition is one way, like the ones that I showed you with the grass that I did and the paint flicks and things like that. That's where that was born out of. It was like, okay, I can either have paint flicks on here, which will annoy me, or I can make it part of the design. That's my solution. This particular charter was so we had put the wrong name on this particular charter. We had combined two people's names. There was two people in the same shire who had almost identical names. It was ridiculous, and we had combined their names by mistake. The award was given out. We figured out that there was this error because the person brought it to us, and because they weren't sure that it was for them and not the other person, and it was actually for them. And I said, "Oh, no problem. I will paint you a whole new one. We'll fix it." But she was adamant she wanted that one back. Um, so my solution to that situation was I very carefully and painstakingly cut out the center of that charter, pasted a new one in behind, and then I just outlined the cut edge with the black pen. And if you didn't run your finger across the page to feel where that edge was, you wouldn't even know that it was done. So on the bottom there, you can see the end result. Worked great. Here's some things that you can do to fix your errors on your charters and scrolls, things that we've already looked at. You can scrape and burnish it, scrape the paper, burnish it back down with a burnisher, and then rewrite it. You do have to be aware that rewriting over something that's been scraped and burnished sometimes might have a little extra bleed than normal, especially if you're like us using charters, which are just paper. Um, you can paint over the blurb if it's small. You can turn that blurb into something else, happy little ladybugs or whatever you can come up with to incorporate. Paint over the wrong text and then rewrite it. Again, as I said earlier, it's not my favorite method, as matching paint color and paper is sometimes hit or miss. And it changes the properties of the paint depending on the light. You could use creative drop shadows or extra leaves or tendrils or flowers and critters and bugs and people or whatever you can come up with to disguise that error. Don't be afraid. Like, again, this is more towards on tier people using charters because there are many of them. Don't be afraid to add elements to a design that you're given. So I know for a lot of other kingdoms you do originals for everything, and so that wouldn't necessarily uh, be that you're having somebody else's design that you're working with. But here in Ontario, because we have multiples of the same design, I always tell people don't be afraid to redraw lines. Um, if something's particularly like you get something like a piece of knotwork that doesn't quite work out where it's supposed to go, I just scrape out lines if I have to and redraw things or add elements to disguise things that are not working right or whatever. And so don't be afraid to do that. You can redraw or add or thicken lines if you've accidentally painted over a line somewhere that you didn't intend to. I have just then thickened the line sometimes just to disguise that some. You can find some witty way to acknowledge the error and move on, like, the pointing manticule hands or little commentaries or cartoons or critters or whatever you can do. Sometimes, if there's an error that you just absolutely, there's nothing you can do to disguise it or anything, you can either choose to just leave it and ignore it or make it fun. Acknowledge that there's the error there and make it fun, uh, which is completely period to do, right? So you can cut out the errors and paste in a new sheet behind, just like that one I just showed you. Sometimes the solution is to ask somebody else for help. So if you've been staring at this scroll for eons, you've worked on it for hours, you're now frustrated because you've made some sort of error and you can't figure out what to do to fix this or hide it or whatever. Sometimes getting somebody else to come and look at it is a good idea. Sometimes it's a good idea to just take that charter or scroll and hand it to somebody else and go, please fix this for me, before you get to the point where you go scrap it and start over. I have done that before. In fact, I have a couple of scrolls out right now to other people that I've just said, can you please fix this? Because I can't, I have been staring at it for forever and I cannot figure out what else to do here. And then the last solution is if it's really that catastrophic, then sometimes it's just scrap it and start over. If there's no way to save it, then that's what you might have to do. Um, the overall theme of this, though, is find something creative. We're all creative people. Find some creative way to fix that thing before the last resort of scrapping it and starting over. As I said, sometimes it's not possible to fix it or disguise it or save it at all. But that's the last resort as far as I'm concerned. All right. So fixing some errors includes keeping some things in your kit to fix errors with. These are the things that I have in my kit. So I keep paper towels or tissues with me. And I use them to often just siphon off if I've like dropped a little paint splotch or something. I will siphon it while it's still very wet, assuming that I've noticed it. Um, I will use a little piece of rolled up paper towel and roll it into a point, and then I just very carefully siphon as much of the paint off as I can. Then I let it dry completely. I don't touch it again until it is completely dry. Because if you try and do anything else over the top of that while it's still slightly wet, you will either, if it's a red paint splotch and you're trying to paint white over the top of it, you're going to end up with a pink splotch, is what's going to happen. So I will wait until that is completely dry. It might mean leaving it for a day or two just so you're safe. And then I might try and scrape it off depending on what the color is, and then burnishing it again and repainting or whatever. I will try and do that. So I keep paper towels and tissues in my kit. Uh, Keeping a clean, dry, white cloth. Do not use anything that has color in it because you never know how fast that color is to the cloth. And you don't want to be wiping over a top of your thing that you've just done and finding out that your teal colored face cloth that you're using is not necessarily dye fixed very well when you have a teal streak across your paper. Ask me how I know. I also keep Q-tips in there. So again, they're good, really good for siphoning off small spots. Keeping an X-Acto blade or craft utility knife, particularly the ones that are super pointy, like you see in the picture on the right there. I like having a different variety of them. So I like ones that have a super pointy tip on them. I also like the ones that have a roundedy tip on there too, because they do scrape differently. So like the scalpel type tips is what I'm talking about. So having some different kinds of tips is really, really handy. Box cutters, I find, don't work as well. They cut a little deeper, and I always found that they don't necessarily scrape so much as gouge. So I don't like using box cutters, but a nice craft utility knife like these, which you usually can find in dollar stores and whatnot, so they're not terribly expensive. Anyway, so they're very handy. I like to keep burnishing stones in there once you have used your scraping knife to scrape off your parchment, vellum, or paper, or whatever it is you're using. You're then going to want to burnish that back down so all those little fibers that are in there aren't sticking straight up. The reason for that is if you try and calligraph over top of that or paint over the top of it, it will bleed on you. So you want to try and burnish it back down to a nice smooth finish, as smooth a finish as you can get. So any smooth, glassy, unblemished stone will do. Agates, hematites, obsidians work well. Make sure that they're very, very clean and make sure that they do not have any little chips or occlusions or anything on the outside of it, because if you try and burnish and there's a tiny little chip in there, it will actually tear the paper instead of burnishing it. So you don't want that. You want to make sure it's really, really clean. I don't recommend using colored glass pebbles because the color will come off of those pebbles. Again, ask me how I know. So unless they're just clear pebbles, if they're clear, then you should be fine. But if there are any colors on them, that color is often a paint on the outside of a clear glass pebble. So that will come off and you don't want that. And they also chip really easy. So don't do that. Or you can get an agate burnisher, which is what you see in the middle of the page there. That one's called a dog tooth, which is probably the most versatile because you do have a tip on there and a flatter edges and whatnot too. So they're very handy. In a pinch, though, the back of a teaspoon will also work. I have used it. It worked quite fine as long as the teaspoon doesn't have any scrapes or anything on it, because again, it'll scrape your paper. But it does work. I have also found, I think it was at Michael's I found these. They are, it looks like a pen. They're quite long, or I should say, it looks like a paintbrush. They're quite long, and one end has a silver ball on it, and the other end has kind of a rubber tip. Um, and they're meant for embossing, but they actually work really well for burnishing too. So, and they come in a bunch of different sizes. I bought a pack. I think there was 3 different sizes in it, from like super tiny to probably about that big around maybe. So those were really handy, and they were very inexpensive too. Keeping a white rubber eraser, not a colored eraser. If you use a pink eraser on your paper, you will be sad. So a clean white rubber eraser. And always make sure that before you start erasing on your page that you actually clean the outside of your eraser, clean off any black gunk that's on there. Sometimes dry smudges of paint you can just simply erase off if you're lucky. But again, you got to make sure it's really, really dry. And a coarse white ink eraser works well. So what I'm talking about is, again, it's an ink eraser. They're usually gray and they're almost pumicey. I'm not sure what the substance in it is, but it's an eraser that kind of has this grit in it. It's good for sometimes just very gently, well, I mean, it's meant for erasing ink. So it makes sense that that would work for doing calligraphy too, but it also works on paint as well. And then you're going to burnish it back down again as well after that. So those are just some of the things that I keep in my kit for fixing errors. You may come up with other things, and if you do, I would love to hear your ideas on other things that you have or have used, or suggestions of things we can all pick up. That would be awesome. And I think that's it. It's just your lighthearted look at Scrabble errors, and it was just meant for us all to kind of overcome our fear of making errors and the disappointment when we feel when we do, and to realize that making a mistake is totally okay, and oopses are period.
We do have one more question.
Sure, yeah.
Have any scrolls or charters been made three-dimensional outside of making a runestone or something like that?
Yes, actually. I myself have a scroll, or what we call scroll-like items. Scroll-like, what was the term they used? Scroll-like, oh, I'm just going to say scroll-like items. I have a horn that somebody actually painted for me, and it's quite lovely. It's just a horn, I guess it's goat horn, maybe. Yeah, that they painted. So they actually did all of the text on it in gold paint, and then it's got gold. I should have brought it, and I didn't think to, but it's in the other room. It has gold bowls on it. So obviously, I've seen rune stones. I have seen people do like, uh, actually, just recently, somebody did a wood burned box. So they did the scroll. I believe the actual scroll text was on the inside of the lid of the box. The outside of the box, they did the person's arms on it, and I think there was a game board on the top and that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's been lots of different things that I have seen as scroll-like objects. That's the word I was looking for, was object. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual piece of paper or vellum parchment. It can be all kinds of different things. Yeah, I love seeing people do creative things as opposed to a scroll.
We have another question. What adhesive did you use to fix that one charter?
Oh, the one that I cut out the whole center of it? As I recall, being that it's just paper, I probably just used white glue. It was quite a while ago, but I'm gonna guess I probably just used white glue on there. I might have used gesso. I could have used that too. Yeah, I can't remember now. I'm gonna guess I probably used white glue though. Probably because that's what I had in my kit at the time, right?
Has wax ever been used on scrolls outside of putting the stamp on there?
That's a good question. I don't know. Um, yeah, we use wax seals. I'm guessing though, are you talking about maybe like impasto,
Incorporating it outside of the wax seal.
like doing impasto kind of thing? Impasto is kind of using a wax-like substance to create a three-dimensional effect in your paint. It's mostly something that they use mostly for oil painting and acrylic painting. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody do that using gouache. I don't know if it would even work to do that using gouache. Um, I honestly don't know how to answer that because I don't think I've ever seen it at all. Yeah, I don't know.
There's a comment in chat that says impasto relies on gesso.
There you go. Yeah, like I said, that's mostly a thing that they use for oil painting and I think acrylic as well. So I don't know if that's a thing that we would do on. I don't on a normal charter. I don't know, but if it was on a scroll-like object that has some dimension as opposed to just being a flat piece, I don't know. Might could work. Who knows? And I think that's it.